So it's now my pleasure to welcome our next speaker, and this is Bridgette Bewick, who is Associate Professor in Psychological Health and Wellbeing at the University of Leeds School of Medicine, a colleague of mine. And her research portfolio is looking at things like monitoring, managing, modifying mental health and wellbeing. And she's a fellow of the Leeds Institute for Teaching Excellence and is currently doing a light fellowship in that institute on how to embody pedagogical well-being in the university curriculum. So obviously very relevant to what we're all talking about today. And so it's a pleasure to welcome you, Bridgette, and over to you.
Cheers. Thanks a lot, Jonathan, for that kind introduction. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And then I'm just going to move all of you so that I can see you as well and get the chat up. I can't guarantee I'll be monitoring the chat as I'll be talking, but I'll do the best I can. I will try. So as Jonathan said, I'm Bridgette Bewick. I tend to throw my arms around a bit when I talk. If it becomes too distracting, tell me in the chat and I'll try and put my hands behind my back. I'm going to talk about placing wellbeing at the heart of the curriculum. And I think there's huge echoes here of what Caroline was talking about. You'll see students are talking about the need, they want to feel respected, valued, that sense of belonging, and not wanting to jump to the end already. I think the message is we should never underestimate the impact that we can make, both as individuals and as organisations and institutions. So let's get started. So who am I? I like to start with this because I think it is at the heart of some of what we forget, that our students don't really know who we are, and they don't always get to see what we might consider our authentic selves. So I am, as Jonathan mentioned some of these things, I'm an associate professor, a chartered psychologist, a journal editor, a mentor. These are the sorts of things and the photos that you'd see if you were inclined to Google me. But what people don't often see when I'm walking down the halls in the School of Medicine is that I'm a Kiwi. I'm first in family at university. I come from a working class family. I'm an immigrant. Britain is my adopted home. I'm an LGBT role model. I'm Pākehā from a mixed heritage family. I'm a daughter, a sister, an auntie, a wife, a storyteller, a yogi. And these are the kinds of pictures that you wouldn't see of me. That's me on the swing with the gumboots on. I think in Britain you call them Wellington boots, maybe. And I don't often bring very much of that to when I'm talking to students and being. Some of it comes in, but I think we do need to think about how are we authentic or not in our interactions with students. Jonathan mentioned that phrase, pedagogical well-being. It's an interesting phrase that most people struggle to say. And what does it mean? Well, it means different things for different people. Now, for me, it's a really broad thing. So it's not just about the curriculum. It's not just about what we put in the curriculum. It's also about how we teach that, how are we practicing, and who's involved in that. It's also about the spaces and the places that we teach in. And then it's about how we manage those transitions that Caroline was talking about. Mental health and well-being, a little bit about where I'm coming from with that. Traditionally, some people have thought of this on one continuum where you've got well-being, which is seen as the absence of any negative mental health. For me, I think about it slightly differently. I see we have well-being and ill-being, and then we have negative and positive mental health. And for me, this is important because when I'm talking about well-being, I'm talking about that more holistic sense of the person flourishing and thriving, rather than looking at a medical diagnosis or mental ill health or mental disorders. And I think our students can fall into any one of these boxes. You get people who are really strong on both, other people who are struggling on both. I don't think we get very many of the double negatives because you have to be functioning at a good enough level in order to be getting into medical education. And then you have people who have a mix of both. And I think sometimes we forget this. We forget that the majority of our students do have levels, ways of coping and ways of managing their well-being that they can capitalize on when called to. I'm not going to spend long on this. Why am I doing this work? Well, it's because of this idea of the crisis of student mental health and well-being. And you'll be aware of the news headlines, and we've had the same thing in student medical education as well, in terms of how the world is seeing university as something that is damaging in some ways, mental health and well-being of our students. There's these sorts of things. For those of you who've heard me talk before, you'll be familiar with this quote. You know, we read a lot that sounds like this, that students' lives are becoming increasingly pressurized, that the structures to support students are not developing at an equivalent pace. It's when I worked out that I wrote that 14, 15 years ago that I thought, hang on, we're developing great services and we need those services to support them. But I think we need to consider, how can we do this differently? We've been saying the same thing time and time again, and we need to find different ways of intervening. Warning triangle. What I'm going to talk about is part of my Light Fellowship data, as Jonathan mentioned. So far, we've collected 1,100 surveys. I'm going to be talking about the 193 that come from the School of Medicine at the University of Leeds. Half of those are from the current academic year. Data collection is still ongoing. The data I'm talking to you about, I downloaded and looked at on Friday. So it's really new insights that I'm going to be talking about. In the sample, the vast majority are undergraduates, and about 85% of them are MBCHB. So they're studying medicine. And we've got more first year students. We've got about 42% of first year students, although the range of the 5 years of medical school at Leeds are represented. So I'm going to go through, in New Zealand we call it a tiki tour, where I take you on all little different bits. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the scales and what the students are saying in there, and then what have they said, their voice. And I really want their voice to come through. And I think you'll really see the match up between some of the things Caroline was saying were being experienced by doctors and what our students are experiencing. So one of the things that quite often we start with is, well, are students engaged in their study? When we ask students, my studies inspire me, you know, to what extent do your studies inspire you? We find that, you know, the vast majority of students, 72 to 85%, are saying that yes, at least once a week, and I think that bar's quite high, at least once a week, my studies inspire me. And that seems to be a bit higher than the rest of the University of Leeds, which is on average about 65% last year. What about how proud they are? Are they proud to be doing their study? Again, at least once a week, about 80 to 90% of them are really proud to be doing the study. So we've got students who are inspired to be at the School of Medicine, and they are really proud of what they're doing. But do they feel like they're connected to the university? We ask, you know, to what extent do you feel very different from most other students here? How often is that the case? And we get about almost 40% of students saying, I feel very different from other students here at the all the time end of the scale. That's a lot of students in my mind who are feeling really very different. But we might ask, well, is that a problem? Is it a problem if we feel different? Different doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a positive thing. But when we ask them to rate how often they feel like they don't belong here, we've got about half the sample saying, I belong here. This is where I belong. But we've got between a quarter and a third saying, I do not belong here. And if we think about the numbers of students in our medical schools and in other disciplines, that's a lot of people who are feeling the sense of, I don't belong here, at the all the time end of the scale. So why might that be? And what is it that is happening within the education system or in our courses and what we're doing that is contributing to that? Well, what I ask students is, what makes university challenging and difficult than it need be? Now, I've just pulled out a few examples. It may not surprise you to know that assessment is something that students talk about here. The fact that a lot of deadlines have been very close together. Surprisingly, or maybe not given the structure of the curriculum, I get this less for School of Medicine students than I do for other parts of the university, but it's still there. A lot of content. This is something that students are really talking about. The timetable is very full on, and that's although the university tells us to be well-rounded people. So there's a sense that the timetable's packed, but you're telling me I need to be all these other things as well. Not enough designated time to study. Lecture week in between placement is filled with research and ethics classes. So what might it look like if we did something a bit differently? And COVID-19 has given us this natural experiment that we're all living through, and some students have given us a clue into what made it less challenging for them. Online exams were helpful and removed the academic stress during this time. This is a comment from a student who sat assessments last year. So bearing in mind that they moved to online exams because we suddenly had to shut campus, there was all kinds of upheaval, and they're saying sitting an exam online in that environment was less stressful than what we normally put them through. Making the exam formative and not time constrained, and cancelling the summative examinations lifted a lot of stress. It would have been particularly stressful while living at home amidst a pandemic with a weaker support network of friends. While that was true of some of the summative exams last year, we do know that some students are commenting that actually now they're concerned about what's going to mean for this year's exams. So I'm not suggesting that they want us to get rid of a whole range of exams, just that the way that we present those exams and the timing of them seems to be important to students. Another thing that they said was made things more challenging is unclear communication. And it comes from the university. It can be difficult to read and follow, lack of clear direction. Receiving information regarding timetabled sessions at short notice, it prevents you planning your time in advance. And this persisted during COVID. A lack of clarity on sessions and if they're occurring or not. And this is something that I've seen in the data as I've looked across it, is that many of the things that are coming out as a result of COVID are an amplification of what was already there. Another thing which is very specific within the University of Leeds to Faculty of Medicine and Health students are the challenge of placements. And I think some of this really echoes, as you'll see as I go through the talk, some of what Caroline was talking about. But one of those things is finances, the financial stress of being a medical student, going to placements and not being fully reimbursed. This was a big cause of a challenge for many of our students. The distance traveling to placement is hard. And I thought the chat about moving around a lot and what that meant, and were students aware of that? For some students, when they're talking about the distance traveled, it's not that far. It is a journey that many of us would make. You would see it within the greater Leeds area or West Yorkshire area. But for these students, it's not something they'd ever considered. So when you're talking about as doctors moving around the country, these are students who think a 30-minute train ride is a long way to go. So I think this is the beginnings of some of that. I have no time to get a job due to being on placement outside Leeds constantly. So it's having financial implications for these students. I didn't want to leave you with this slide thinking that placement was all bad. There is a sense throughout the data that, you know, staff on placement help you feel welcomed and confident, but it's the organisation and the way that placement structures support or not students that students who are finding it hard are talking about. That sense of isolation was a big one that came up. Placements are difficult as you're just another nameless student. Larger numbers make the course feel impersonal. There's a lack of having a relationship with your academic tutor. Staff not replying to emails. And at Leeds, many of the students are saying it's been better than ever since the pandemic. Staff are actually replying to emails. They feel like they're there for me. It feels impersonal at times. The sense of isolation while on placement, when a patient dies and you're all alone in hospital accommodation, away from your friends, it really messes with your mind. So those stories, those personal stories that Caroline was talking about, our students are experiencing those and they are grappling with them right now. Personal tutors that don't meet up with us. So what would it look like if that was done differently? Well, there are some students who are talking about how things have been different from them. During COVID-19, sending out regular emails for support and having a chat if needed. This is before COVID, lecturers getting to know us individually and support staff. Talking to my personal tutor, very supportive. They want us to get through the content, even though they know how much it is. So that sense of the school understands where we are and that it's going to be difficult, but they're there to support us. When there's a really good clinician on placement, that makes me feel very involved as a student and I'm helping rather than hindering. And supportive staff who are willing to listen if you have problems. And that echoes again what Caroline was saying about the importance of listening. They're not asking for them to be solved. They wanted to be listened to. And all of that led me to be asking students, well, when have you felt a sense of belonging? And what does that mean as we transition in and out of remote learning? Making friends with other medics was really high on that list. Also meeting people like me on my course who share similar values and morals, or sharing classes face-to-face with other students last year. During positive feedback from lecturers or during my lectures. Some consultants give great feedback and really make you into a useful part of the team, which gives you a sense of belonging. Again, personal tutors came up again. I feel the medical school is on my side and that they celebrate student successes. The staff are so warm and friendly, and I feel like they're so supportive. Even when things don't go well, they focus on the positives. And how with the sense of belonging, I think these two quotes really show that it's not about a one-size-fits-all. So here, one person was saying they've really enjoyed having very varied groups during tutorials. This is online, so that we're able to get to know as many people in the year as possible. This is breakout rooms. Another student says, having one consistent group meant that you made some really good friends, so that you were guaranteed to see those people weekly. And I think in the round, this shows us that what students are looking for is opportunities to make these connections and ways of connecting with people. And what they're valuing is where things have been designed in a way that facilitates that to happen. And when you looked across all the comments, there were these 6 things that seem to be coming out as key themes. That sense of belonging and well-being comes from feeling seen and respected by staff, and that's including academic and support service staff. It's about feeling seen and valued on placement, having opportunities to sit with, even if that's virtually, friends and peers, And meaningful interactions, group work at Leeds came out really highly in what students were talking about. That sense of creating things together was important to them, but also during seminars, tutorials and lectures. I haven't included quotes on this, but students were also talking about the physical spaces around the campus and how important those physical spaces were, and their extracurricular activities, which is where they want time for a work-life balance to be able to join those societies. I think in the data that the student responses to how we've responded to COVID-19 illustrate how small changes can really make a difference. Receiving an informal email, or being checked up on by a member of staff, or having friends that you know you're going to meet online. I think there's real potential to capitalize on these opportunities to embody wellbeing across the medical education curriculum. But within that, you would have seen that people feature really heavily. So we do need to address the challenge of sustainability of best practice and managing those expectations. There is a workload associated to these things, and we need to work out how can we maximize the resource we have in a way that allows that sustainability. And for me, I still think of pedagogical well-being as all of these things, but we quite often focus on aspects of the technical precision of the curriculum, or how we're thinking about processes and policies. Actually, what students are talking about is the people that they're meeting and interacting with, and the quality of those interactions. So I think we should be asking ourselves, what values and principles underpin our pedagogy? How can we systematically and systemically place wellbeing at the heart of medical education practices? And how do we develop medical education practices that balance technical precision, which is incredibly important, with a sense of compassion? And how can we tailor that implementation so students and staff feel seen and valued?